Hi there. What you're going to be learning in today's lesson is how to solve absolute value equations. So before we even get started, I just want to remind you that when we take the absolute value of a number, it will always be positive because absolute value represents the distance a number is from zero. So if I took the absolute value of 5, well, that would equal 5. Similarly, if I took the absolute value of -5, that would also be 5 because -5 is 5 spaces away from 0, just like +5 is. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind because when we're solving absolute value equations, we will need to separate the equation once we isolate the absolute value to show that there could be two possible solutions. So let's take a look at our steps. So looking at our steps, I have them listed at the top here and also on the side. The first thing we're going to do is isolate our absolute value. So in other words, if we look at this equation, we have the absolute value of 2x minus 1 minus 2 equals 3. Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move that 2 over. And what that does for us is it isolates our absolute value. So we have 2x minus 1 equals 5. It's at this point that we will see if our equation makes sense. So what you're looking for is this number a negative number? If it's a negative number, we would have no solution. As long as it's 0 or bigger, we proceed. So now what we do is we break this equation into the two possibilities. The first one, we take 2x minus 1, whatever's inside the absolute value will never be changed, and we set it equal to 5. The second case is where we take the 2x minus 1 and we set it equal to -5, showing, that this is the same as this when it comes to absolute value. And now we solve these equations. So we're going to add 1 to each side. We get 2x equals 6. And then divide by 2, we get x equals 3. Over here, we do the same thing. We add 1 to each side. We get 2x equals -4. And then we divide by 2, and we get x equals -2. So notice we have two answers here. One of the things we have to do with absolute value equations is we have to check our answers. So that's always going to be our final step because sometimes just something doesn't work. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to erase this just because I need a little bit more space, but I'm going to keep the two answers there. And to check our work, what we're basically going to do is we're going to drop 3 into our absolute value equation and see if it gives us a true statement. So inside the absolute value, we would have 2 times 3 minus 1 minus 2 equals 3. So let's do the math here. We start inside our absolute value. 2 times 3 is 6, minus 1 is 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5. And we have 5 minus 2, which is 3, which is a true solution, which is a true statement. So that means that x equals 3 is a solution. In a similar fashion, we're going to test -2. So again, we go to our original equation. We have 2 times -2 minus 1, close that absolute value, minus 2 equals 3. And again, we're going to start inside. 2 times -2 is -4. Minus 1 gives us -5. But remember, the absolute value of -5 is 5. So once again, we get 5 minus 2 is 3. And yes, 3 does equal 3. So -2 is also a solution. Okay, so we just have to be really careful, make sure we test our solutions, make sure we break it into two scenarios. So let's go ahead and let's do the next problem. So let's think about those steps that we talked about. We look at our original equation, And what we're going to do is we're going to isolate our absolute value. So in order to do that, we have to move this 8 over to the other side by subtracting it. What we get is the absolute value of 5x equals negative 5. Now, does this make sense? Remember, we have to make sure absolute value is 0 or bigger. This does not make sense. Therefore, there's no solution. Okay, and again, the reason we have this is once we isolated our absolute value, once we got our absolute value alone, it's equal to a negative. And that just doesn't make sense. Let's look at example 3. Okay, we have our absolute value here, minus 12 equals 8. So we're going to isolate our absolute value. We're going to add 12 to each side. We get the absolute value of 4x plus 2 equals 20. So we have clearly isolated our absolute value, right? Like these are our absolute value and there's nothing else on that side of the equation. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to break it into the two scenarios. Again, we have a positive number over here, so that's going to work for us. 4x plus 2 is unchanged. We set that equal to 20. And then the second one, we take a 4x plus 2, which is unchanged, and we set it equal to negative 20. And we're going to solve both of these equations. So we will subtract 2 from each side, giving us 4x equals 18. And then divide by 4, divide by 4. We get x equals 4.5. Okay, we'll test that in a minute. We're going to solve this equation in the same manner. We will subtract 2 from each side, giving us 4x equals negative 22. And then again, we will divide by 4 to isolate our x value, and we get negative 5.5. Okay, so two possible solutions, positive 4.5 and negative 5.5. We will test these values in the original equation. So the first one we're checking is 4.5. So we'll have the absolute value of 4 times 4.5 plus 2, close up that absolute value, minus 12 equals 8. We're going to test and see if that's true. So 4 times 4.5 is 20. Or I'm sorry, that's 18. Plus 2 is 20. The absolute value of 20 is 20. Minus 12 equals 8. And yes, that is true. 8 does equal 8, which means 4.5 is a solution. Now we'll go ahead and we'll test our negative 5.5. So we have the absolute value of 4 times negative 5.5 plus 2, close the absolute value, minus 12 equals 8. So 4 times negative 5.5 is negative 22, plus 2 gives us the absolute value of negative 20, minus 12 equals 8. And remember, the absolute value of negative 20 is 20. So once again, we get 20 minus 12 equals 8. And yes, that's going to work out for us that 8 equals 8. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Good luck on the next few problems. Make sure that you solve following these steps. Have a great day.